Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says he's grateful to US politicians who've backed a massive foreign aid package for his country. The $61 billion bill includes air defence missiles and artillery shells, as well as $7 billion for US military operations in the region. The legislation passed by the House over the weekend will likely be signed into law this week after a Senate vote in the coming days. Speaking to NBC's Meet the Press, Zelensky said he believes the aid package will prevent the war with Russia from expanding.
This aid will strengthen Ukraine. We did lose the initiative there. Now we have all the chance to stabilize the situation and to overtake the initiative.
Zelenskyy's comments, spoken there by a translator, were echoed by those of the UK Foreign Secretary. David Cameron welcomed the extra support for Ukraine, calling it a vital step forward.
The US House of Representatives also tied legislation requiring TikTok's owner ByteDance to sell its stake in the social media firm into that Ukraine aid bill. If the Chinese parent company refuses to divest, its platform may be banned in the US. Sources have told Bloomberg that ByteDance intends to fight the effort in court and exhaust all legal challenges before it considers any kind of sell-off. Meanwhile, the TikTok executive who was tasked with placating US lawmakers' concerns about the social media platform is reportedly leaving the company. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the details.
The reports say that TikTok is letting him go, saying he wasn't doing enough to stave off U.S. security concerns regarding its ties with owner ByteDance in China. Eric Anderson's role had been incrementally reduced, but with the passage of the divest bill passed by the House over the weekend, it looks now more imminent. A TikTok statement said the reports were false, but then the publication, The Information, said Anderson has informed his legal team that he is leaving and that it is his decision. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Tesla has once again slashed the price of its vehicles as it looks to defend its market share from rivals in China and elsewhere. The aggressive move comes at a tough time for the automaker, with its share price down around 40% this year. Last week, the EV giant announced global job cuts of more than 10% and a recall of its new Cybertruck. Meanwhile, Bloomberg has learned that a number of staff have been left unsettled by CEO Elon Musk's sudden focus on a self-driving vehicle robotaxi. Bloomberg's global business editor, Peter Verco, says the change of direction is dizzying.
Even by Elon Musk's standards, it's been a pretty wild week. I think what investors want more than anything, though, is just some clarity on the strategy. It was only 3 months ago that on the earnings call, Musk was talking up progress on this $25,000 mass market car. Last week, the whole thing seems to have swung towards this autonomous self-driving taxi or robotaxi.
Peter Verco's comments come as markets await Tesla's latest set of results on Tuesday. The firm is expected to report a 40% plunge in operating profits and its first revenue decline in 4 years.
ECB Rate Setter Francois Villeroy de Galhau says that oil market uncertainty won't dissuade the central bank from cutting rates in June. His reasoning, even if conflict did push up oil costs, policymakers would have to analyse whether those shocks fuelled underlying prices and inflation expectations. The Bank of France governor also made clear that policymakers shouldn't wait too long to lower borrowing costs, barring a surprise. Markets currently expect the ECB to cut rates by 0.25% at its next meeting on the 6th of June.
The Conservative MP Mark Menzies is quitting the party and won't stand at the next election after being accused of misconduct. The MP for Fylde in Lancashire reportedly telephoned an elderly local activist at 3 a.m. one morning asking her to give him £5,000. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more.
With Menzies, there are now 64 Conservative MPs who won't try and keep their seats in the next election. That's 18% of the party. The now ex-Tory MP's exit spares the Prime Minister another by-election and more days of lurid headlines. Rishi Sunak will be hoping to rally his party around immigration with a vote on his flagship Rwanda bill coming later today. But it doesn't change the difficult narrative forming around the government around sleaze and electoral doom. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
And staying in the UK, asking prices for homes here are rising at their highest rate in a year. The increase is largely being driven by figures at the top end of the market. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the details.
Buying a house in the UK will now cost you just over £372,000 on average, according to data from Rightmove. That's up 1.7% from last year and only £570 below the all-time record for UK home prices seen in May 2023. The price gains are being driven by larger 4- and 5-bed homes, a corner of the market that has seen the strongest start to the year as the number of new sellers rose 18% from 2023, says the online sales portal. But those looking to purchase their first homes are struggling to keep up. The highest interest rates in 16 years, combined with surging inflation, have drained consumer finances, factors which could limit further house price growth in 2024. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is up 0.8%. Eurostoxx 50 futures are 0.3% higher. And the 10-year Treasury yield up 3.5 basis points to 4.66%.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the US bill now on a fast track to grant aid to Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, plus force the Chinese owners of TikTok to sell its stake or face a ban in the United States. But before we get to that, another story caught our eye this morning, how a craze for bubble tea has created at least half a dozen billionaires in China.
I feel like I have to preface by saying that I don't get bubble tea. Regular tea, fine. Bubble tea, no.
I'm afraid I have a hole in my wallet due to bubble tea. And
Wait, is this you or are you buying for members of your family?
For members of the family, I will put it that way. The craze has hit London, probably did about a couple of years ago. It's everywhere. It's very expensive, quite sugary. But yes, I think this read on the Bloomberg terminal, though, about the money behind it is totally fascinating.
Yeah, and it comes ahead of China's number 3 bubble tea chain is listing in Hong Kong tomorrow, Baicha Baidao, and it's expected to raise more than $300 million. And it sort of speaks to the craze around it. But what's interesting is the competition in the market in China is so fierce. And what's distinguished this company is they charge less than their rivals. They've managed to build market share, grow their sales because they're charging around $2 for their half-litre tea, which is around half of what the industry standard was when it comes to the prices they're charging in China. But there's a question too, of course, Chinese economy is slowing, customers are reining in their spending. Maybe this is something that might actually impact this market as much as everything else. Also comes at a very interesting time for IPOs in Hong Kong as well. So there's a whole number of strands to this story. Billionaires, bubble tea, stock market listings, it's got us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in Bloomberg Business Week, of course. So all the Bs. Let's bring you that now, though. Back to our top story, shall we? The US Senate is expected to approve more than $95 billion in foreign aid, including funding for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan on Tuesday. For Ukraine, the assistance is expected to reach the military pretty swiftly, but it's also seen as unlikely to turn the tide of the war on its own. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's EMEA News Director Rosalind Matheson. Good morning, Ros. Good to see you in person. The aid package was long delayed. It'd been broken down into pieces for it to be passed by the legislators. What is actually part of this huge package?
Well, it's a whole lot of different stuff that's part of it, really. Most of it is to allow the US to buy more weapons to send to these places, particularly Ukraine, but also Israel, which has used a lot of kit for its Iron Dome military defence system of late, defending against missile and other attacks on Israel. So it's to allow them to replenish their stocks. Some of it's quite specific. It's, in the case of Taiwan, to support some development around submarines. For example, in Ukraine's case, it's also about economic aid, loans to Ukraine to help keep literally the lights on for the government and the administration. So it's a conglomerate of stuff, as you say, broken down into pieces to allow it to get through. It'll come together again in one place to get to the Senate, of course, where it will pass, as you say, likely on Tuesday. But the idea is simply to really allow the faster flow of weaponry into various places, most of all Ukraine.
Will it be enough, though, to make a difference to Ukraine's fight against Russia?
Well, it sounds as though the US has been preparing for this, so there is quite a lot of equipment piled up near the border with Poland that can move pretty quickly. But either way, we're still looking at least a matter of weeks for that to happen. And certainly for some of the longer-range missile stuff that they're talking about as part of this bill, that's going to take longer, and that's what Ukraine says it really needs. And at this point, any aid obviously is better than none, but aid of this magnitude 6 months ago probably would have been more beneficial on the battlefield Ukraine than coming now. And the question is, has momentum really turned in favour of Russia? We can see they're making gains on the ground. We can see the progress there, getting those weapons to the front line, including things like artillery and ammunition, will take time. And is it really too late to stem that tide? That is the question, especially, as they're gearing up for fresh offensives. So while the aid is no doubt very welcome by Ukraine, you can see the comments from the government, especially President Zelenskiy yesterday. He's also still a bit cautious. Like, he knows momentum is against them, and this aid may not really do that much to change the equation on the ground.
Also included in this bill, as you say, quite sprawling, and it touches on many issues, the Iranian sanctions, US sanctions against Iran. Will those make a difference to the oil price?
Well, that's the thing. Actually, last week we had a Twitter space with some of our experts in-house, and we debated Iran sanctions on quite an existential level, because a bit like Russia and other parts of the world, there's pretty much nothing in Iran that's not sanctioned at this point. And has that really deterred Iran? Not arguably, because the main thing the US would need to do is really seek to take Iran out of the global oil market and stop it supplying oil anywhere. And in an election year with one eye on inflation in the economy, it's unlikely that the US administration is going to want to do that. And so you're still allowing Iran to supply the market, different parts of the market, with oil, and that's important for Iran's economy and therefore for its war machinery. So unless you actually change the supply dynamic, you're not going to change Iran's behaviour. And you can see the high caution about anything that might cause actual proper disruption to the oil market. And so the oil price has gone up a bit as we've seen some of these strikes back and forth. You've seen a premium come into oil on the idea of geopolitical risk, but so far we've not seen any sign that supply will properly be disrupted when it comes to Iran.
Just a word on what this means in domestic US politics as well, because the Speaker ignored demands to add US border legislation into this package as well. Kind of what's the dynamic around that, and what does that mean for his position?
Well, his position is probably a little bit precarious as a result. I mean, you have some members of his party saying they're going to have a vote to oust him. That's not going to happen immediately with the House on recess. But he's obviously taken a call that he wants to throw his lot in with the hawks in the Republican Party. So you've got two camps essentially at this point. You've got the hawks who say the US needs to be out in the world militarily, standing up for what it believes in. You've got those who are more isolationist foreign policy, saying the US shouldn't be spending its time on other people's conflicts overseas. So he's got some backing from the hawks in the Republican camp. And most interestingly, he did meet with the Republican nominee, or the presumptive Republican nominee, Donald Trump, a couple of weeks ago. They had a meeting and a long chat. We don't quite know what happened in that conversation, but one would imagine that this came up, and possibly if he thinks that he's managed to convince Donald Trump and he's got his support, that may have been a factor in his decision to move forward. And of course, Donald Trump is now very influential in what happens within Congress itself when it comes to the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. Ros, thank you so much for your time. Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson.
We want to dig into another aspect of that aid package, which is part of that legislation would force the Chinese-controlled ByteDance to divest itself from the social media app TikTok or face a ban in the US. Our Asia Government and Politics correspondent Rebecca Chung-Wilkins is with us for more. TikTok, Rebecca, has spent years trying to convince the US that it's not a national security threat. That effort seemed to have failed now.
Yes, I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, various US actors have tried to figure out some way to curb or restrict or outright ban TikTok in multiple other bills in Congress and so on in other ways, including, for example, also former President Trump. It does seem that this sort of particular framework, this divest or ban, manages to have threaded that needle. Worth saying, though, I think that behind the scenes, both the company and Chinese embassy workers, for example, reported reportedly still meeting with congressional staff, still trying to lobby against the bill and trying to work that magic behind the scenes. Also, of course, you've seen on the app itself, TikTok encouraging users to call their senators and oppose this. But it does seem like we are moving from that sort of discussion influence phase to a litigation phase. And TikTok has said it's going to exhaust all the possible legal avenues it can to try and prevent any kind of divestment. And Beijing potentially has the means to block any such divestment as well.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.